Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Broken Link, which is episode 25 of season 4 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review every episode of Star Trek one episode at a time. In this video I cover the 4th season finale of Deep Space Nine, Broken Link. So Broken Link is the episode in which Odo gets a disease and he's starting to perish and he's in a lot of pain, and Bashir can't solve this issue, so the only solution is to go try to find the Founders and see if they can heal him. And so the Defiant goes into the Gamma Quadrant. Garak goes along because he wants to ask the Founders about survivors of the Cardassian attempt to destroy the Founders' homeworld. And so the Dominion does intercept the Defiant, and they negotiate with Cisco that they will take Odo back to their homeworld and that the Defiant can accompany them, but they need to erase the Defiant's log in order so they don't know where the Founders' homeworld is. So Odo beams down to go into the Great Link to be judged because the lead founder says specifically that he is being put on trial, that they gave him this virus so that he would be forced to come home to be judged for killing a changeling back in the 3rd season episode, The Adversary. While he's on the planet, Garak attempts to wipe out and genocide the Founders, even though it will mean the death of everyone on the Defiant, but Worf finds out what he's doing and beats the crap out of him and prevents him from doing so. Then Odo is released from the Great Link and he has been punished, and the punishment is that he was turned into a solid, and his anatomy now represents a human being, and so he feels like he lost something, and he returns to Deep Space Nine, where he tells Cisco that his job is all he has left. However, they're watching a declaration of war from Garak of the Klingon Empire, as he says he's going to invade a Federation world, which could start a war. But while Odo's watching it, he realizes that when he was in the Great Link, he knows that the Founders were trying to hide something from him, and he saw images, and one of the images was of Garak, as Odo shockingly states that Garak is a changeling. Dun dun dun. So I did, as I was saying before, I stopped taping the episodes of Star Trek off the TV by this stage, because before with TNG, early DS9, I would tape every single episode and keep a collection of VHS tapes. But I had stopped earlier this season, and so I wasn't doing it at this stage, but I did remember I taped this episode and the following 5th season premiere and had those 2 episodes like separate on its own tape, just in the middle of all this other shit I wasn't taping. So I do remember that. And I think at first, like, I was trying to convince myself that these episodes were really good because they were, you know, the season finale and the season premiere. But yeah, the more I thought about it, like, there was always this part, like, in the back of my mind that was saying, no, these episodes aren't good. But I was just trying to ignore that and convince myself that no, these are great. There's a changeling, there's Dominion, there's a changeling in charge of the Klingon Empire. Isn't this great? But yeah, the more I thought about it, the more I listened to that part of me that was saying, no, this is actually not that great. It's not terrible. but it's not that great either. Um, so I would actually say that this is my least favorite of the season finales of D Space Nine. It's probably, yeah, just right behind In the Hands of the Prophets and Tears of the Prophets would probably be my three least favorite finales. It's funny, it's the only one of my least favorite finales that doesn't have the word prophets in it. But I think this is my least favorite. Now, again, not to say it was terrible, but yeah, and I heard other people say, "Oh, this In the Hands of the Prophets was worse." I'm like, I actually disagree. I actually think In the Hands of the Prophets that had the whole school thing and commentary on, extreme Christianity, and Vedic Wynn introduced her, and she was a great villain. So I actually think that's a little bit better than this. And of course, the best, if I was going to rank them all, which I might as well now that I'm at it, I think the best is probably the series finale, What You Leave Behind, and second best would be Call to Arms, and third best would be The Adversary, and fourth best would be The Jem'Hadar. So those would be the four best, and then my three least favorites, yeah, the Prophet ones and this one. um, Anyway, also when I first watched this, I used to kind of consider this this and Apocalypse Rising as sort of a two-parter, as like one episode, but more recent years I stopped doing that. And as I said, I will, for D Space Nine, all the season finales / season premieres I will consider separate, and I will review them separately. Even though I already reviewed Tears of the Prophets, Shadows and Symbols, and Image in the Sand, I already reviewed that as one episode. When I do my revisiteds, I'm going to separate them out, though. Well, Image in the Sand, Shadows and Symbols, there will be one video, because that's a clear two-parter, but Tears of the Prophets is separate. So I think Deep Space Nine is different than TNG and Voyager in that regard, where many finales and premiere two-parters are two-parters, which I review as one episode, like Best of Both Worlds, Scorpion, Times Arrow, Equinox, all of that I still review as one episode. But DS9, I think, is different. They have a clear cutoff. Even though I used to consider this one episode, they are, in fact, two separate episodes. This one's about Odo and the Link, and the next one's about the Klingons going to war and Cisco trying to expose Galron as a changeling. Now, they are related to each other. Like, they feed into one another, which is why I used to consider it a two-parter. And if you didn't see this episode and you watched the season 5 premiere, you would be a bit lost. And I do believe they had a previously on segment at the start of Apocalypse Rising, but still, even though they do feed into each other, they are separate stories. Because the whole Garon thing was just a thing in the background throughout this episode until they ended it on the big cliffhanger. Oh, which, to be fair, I was shocked by that cliffhanger. I did find it exciting, and I was like, oh, I can't wait to. I thought it was a really good cliffhanger to end the season on. Which is why I think I was trying to convince myself that I really liked this episode, because I did like that cliffhanger. But when I put my analysis hat on and I analyzed the episode for its own, everything that happened before that cliffhanger, it's not really that interesting. It's kind of okay. It's not terrible, but it's not what I would call one of the best. And as I said, I think it's my least favorite of the finales. And also the other thing, and I talked about this before, me and my sister had this running joke about D Space Nine because TNG and Voyager would often end their seasons on cliffhangers and have cliffhanger two-parters, and but D Space Nine, we would joke, would just end the season with Odo saying something shocking. And to be fair, they only did it twice. They did it in the Adversary, and they did it here. Because the Adversary, of course, was the whole "it's too late, we're everywhere" thing, and then in this episode is Gowron's a changeling. But those were the only two times. Like they ended season 5 in an actual cliffhanger. And yeah, 6 kind of had a cliffhanger too. So, and of course, Odo didn't say anything shocking in seasons 1 or 2 finales. It was just these two, but still, it was like a running joke that instead of having a cliffhanger, they just have Odo saying something shocking. But anyway, they did it 2 years in a row. So, but anyway, anyway. So the main plot of the episode is Odo getting this disease, and then having to return to the Great Link to be judged, and for killing another changeling, and he is judged, and he's turned into a human. And I just don't think that's all that interesting. Really, I mean, it's kind of interesting. It's like, as I said, not the worst thing in the world, but I don't think it's finale worthy, personally. This might have been better as like a mid-season episode, although the shocking ending was finale worthy, but the rest of the episode wasn't. And if the whole episode would have been about changeling infiltrators, it might have been more interesting, but just Odo, being sick and having to go home, it's fine. I do think it's interesting that we actually, and again, this is D Space Nine really showing that they stick to the continuity, that they just don't do, something happens and we just pretend like it didn't happen, like they did very recently for fucking Hard Time, but that's another story. But to be fair, they do follow up on some important things, which other shows like Voyager and TNG a lot of times don't. And that is the whole thing with Odo killing a changeling in the Adversary, because they made a big deal in season 3. No changeling has ever harmed another. Oh, to be fair, they only said that in 2 episodes, I believe, or maybe 3. I can't remember if she said that in Heart of Stone. Maybe she did, but she definitely said it in The Search, and then said it again in Dai's cast. So it was a thing, and no changeling has ever harmed another. And then I think Odo even referenced that in the Adversary, and then he kills another changeling. I think the other changeling said that too. No changeling has ever harmed another. And so I love that there are consequences for that, because they make such a big deal about no changeling ever harming another, and Odo kills another changeling, so there should be consequences for that. So I do like that that's the case. Now, as far as how Odo got the disease, I think I was reading Memory Alpha, and if I go by memory, I'm pretty sure they said that they infected him when the Admiral Layton changeling over, in the episode Homefront, when Odo was on Earth, and there was a changeling impersonating Admiral Layton, and he shook his hand, and they did a quick link, and he's like, "Well done, Odo," because Odo figured out he was a changeling. I think Memory Alpha was saying that's when he was infected with the disease, so if so, they said it was ironic because he was and when he went and visited Earth was when Section 31 infected him with the changeling disease, and also the changelings infected him with this other disease, and so he was twice infected. But I've been doing background on other theories, and apparently, in the episode To the Death, the script has it written that when Wei-Yun, like, touches Odo, so I can't remember, it touches on the shoulder or something, that's when he's infected with the changeling virus. And apparently that was in the script. So that's more official. And that would have been pre-planned, as opposed to the Homefront one would be, retrospective, what do they call a retcon? It's the definition of retcon is retroactive. Can't remember what it stands for. Retroactive, not controversy or continuity. Maybe continuity, retroactive continuity. Maybe, I can't remember. Whatever. It would be a retcon. It would be in retrospect. Oh yes, that's when it happened. So I have an issue though with both, because the Homefront one is like, yeah, as I said, like, it was very clear that's not what they were intending, and that would see. I don't know. I think I might like the Homefront one better, because my problem with the To the Death one is that they didn't know that, the Wei-Yun and the Jem'Hadar team did not know that they would end up being taken on board the Defiant and working with Starfleet, let alone that Odo would be on the Defiant. So they didn't happen to know. So if Wei-Yun managed to infect Odo with the disease, that means all the Vorta were just randomly carrying this disease around, or and then just if you find Odo, go ahead and infect him. Like, that seems really far-fetched to me. And also the way Wei-Yun was saying, "Oh, are you ready to return to your people?" I mean, that could be interpreted as trying to trick Odo to go back to the Founder homeworld so he can be judged. So I guess you could make that argument, and that when Odo refused to go, then he infected him with the disease. But that doesn't satisfy the complaint that why would all Vorta just randomly be carrying this disease. And so the latent thing is probably better, because I think the changelings who are on Earth might expect, Starfleet to bring Odo there since he's their ally, and so then they would be prepared to have that virus, and it seems like the changelings linking with Odo would be a better way to transmit the disease rather than just Wei-Yun tapping him on the shoulder or whatever. So yeah, I think I probably like the latent theory better. But that's not what was in the script. But and the whole thing with Section 31 infecting him, that was definitely a retcon. That was such a retcon. And I'll get to that when I cover Season 7. I mean, I don't totally hate it because it led to very interesting storytelling, but it does bug me that they retconned what the changeling disease was. It was supposed to be something totally different. And it does make me wonder how good it could have been if they actually played it out the other way, which is all the changelings dying off and Odo being the only last survivor. Like, that would be really interesting. But they took it in a different direction, and a different direction they took in it was really good, so I can't complain too much about that. But the whole thing about Odo being infected in Homefront by Section 31, well, he turned into a human afterwards and then turned back into a changeling. So this disease follow him into his human anatomy and then follow back when he was in changeling. Like, that seems a bit loosey-goosey iffy for me. But hey. Now, on the topic of Odo turning into a human, I'll cover this more when I get into Season 5. I didn't like this storyline. I thought it's, in retrospect, it seems like just an excuse for D Space Nine to save money, so they don't have to do the Odo effects. Although he goes like most of the episodes without doing the changeling thing because it costs a lot of money. So they didn't even need to do that. But then, and then episodes like Things Past, they're like, oh, he created this link because he still has this latent changeling thing. So they're still treating him like a changeling, so why bother turning him to a human so he can do stupid episodes like Ascent where he has to climb the mountain with Quark, which is fucking dumb. I hate that. So, yeah, and so when he returned to a changeling, I was so happy. I was like, oh, thank God we got rid of this stupid storyline. And also, the whole thing about the repeating the storyline of a main character getting exiled from their culture. It had Worf do it for the second fucking time in Way of the Warrior, and then the previous episode we just did it with Quark, and now we're doing it again with Odo. Isn't that repetitive? Doesn't that come off as repetitive to anyone else? Like, it comes off as repetitive to me, even though I just noticed this. Was pointing out by a Patreon supporter. I didn't realize this before, that 3 characters were exiled this season. 2 were like twice in a row, like one episode after another. But yeah, I always, as I said, I like the continuity aspect of there being consequences for Odo killing another changeling. But then again, like they even pointed out in Behind the Lines in season 6 when Odo meets I think it is the next time after this episode that Odo meets the female changeling, and she's like, oh, it's great to see you, you're one of us and whatever, and he's like, wait, you just turned me into a human and before killing another changeling, and now that I'm a changeling again, you're just okay with me? She's like, we've forgiven you. That does seem a bit, yeah, again, a bit loosey-goosey, like all's fine now because he found some other independent way to turn back into a changeling. Like, I don't know, it just seems a bit loose to me. And the whole thing with, yeah, I guess I'll talk about this more when I get to the next episode, Apocalypse Rising, about how they completely changed direction with Odo, because at the end of this episode, Odo's like, all I have left is my job. Please let me do my job. That's all I have left. And then the next episode, he's slacking off and not doing his job. Now, I suppose you could say he got more depressed from in between these 2 episodes, and his attitude shifted. You could say that, but I still think it's a little bit inconsistent. So, yeah, a lot of this episode was just Odo lying in bed being grumpy. That's why I don't think it's all that great. It's like, he doesn't want anyone to see him, and when Kira shows up to talk to him, he's like, I don't really want company. She's like, that's alright, I'm not staying, I'm just giving you the criminal activity report. And then, so he sees about some Bosilic freighter, which is the same, like, heavy metal glam rock 80s glam rock punk star that we saw in Flirting with Quark in what was that episode? Oh, Homefront. No, not Homefront, Homecoming in season 2, the season 2 premiere. And then she was again in season 3 in the Abandoned, where she gave Quark all this junk that turned out to have a Jim Hadar baby in it. And then we see her again trying to steal something, and Odo like shows up to stop them, and he like freaks out. Why didn't Odo bring deputies with him? He always brings deputies with him. Was he worried that the deputies would be like, oh, you're supposed to be in sickbay or the infirmary? I don't think they would. I think the deputies would report to him, and he'd be, if they said that, he could be like, look, I'm your boss, do as I say, and they would. I think the reason why he didn't bring any deputies or other security officers with him is so the episode can happen, so they can have this cool scene of Odo reaching out with his hand and being alone, and I don't know, it all felt unnecessary and a huge distraction. And then later, like, he was on a Defiant, being all sick, and Garak was there to keep him interesting. They're pointing out the fact that, Sisko had Garak come because he's like, oh, what do we have to offer him? Sympathy, open ear? And Garak is like, oh, well, you offer sympathy. I offer intrigue or whatever. And it had Garak spinning all these stories about being a gardener on Romulus and Odo trying to figure it out to keep him interesting. It's like, yeah, it's fine. I guess. I don't know. I just don't think it's finale material, personally. Now, speaking of Garak, might as well get into him. I think this is the first time they really mention... It's not the first time they mention he's a gardener, but it's the first time they really get into that he was a gardener on Romulus. I thought they had mentioned it earlier, but the more I think about it, I don't think they did. I think this is... Because they do reference this in the previous episode, the one right before this, body parts, because Quark goes to Garak, saying, kill me. And Garak is like, what are you talking about? I'm not a killer. And he's like, you weren't always a tailor. And Garak is like, no, I wasn't. I was a gardener before this. So I think that was the first time they mentioned Garak was a gardener. And here they brought it up, he was a gardener on Romulus. Then there was that book that came out after Deep Space Nine finished, written by Andrew Robinson, co-authored, I should say, where they got into Garak being a gardener on Romulus, and they got more into this and what happened. I can't remember, though. It's been a couple decades since I read that book. I just remember they got into it. And I think it's implied, though, that some of the shit he's saying to Odo was half-truths, I guess is the best way of saying it. It was kind of... sort of, I like there were elements of it that were the truth, but and that's like typical of Garak. But the whole thing of Garak like wanting to ask the changeling for survivors, I mean, if you look at the Dias cast and all those Cardassian ships, like, you wouldn't think there would be any survivors. Like, and when she says there were no survivors, Garak acts like shocked. He acts like they're all dead, and I'm like, well, of course, because that's the way it looked. It looked like the Jem'Hadar were not taking any prisoners, and were just destroying the fuck out of that fleet. So I think it was far-fetched to believe there would be survivors. But then, of course, the changeling says, oh yeah, they're dead, you're dead, all Cardassians are dead. And the whole thing I can think about while I'm watching that scene is what happens next season when the Cardassians join the Dominion. So it seems like the founders did a complete 180 from all Cardassians to dead to, oh, Cardassians are now our allies and part of the Dominion. I think, but to be fair, I think the Gul Dukat going to Cardassia, to the Dominion and saying, we want to join you, I think that would change their mind, to be fair, because from the other Cardassians who tried to wipe out the Dominion. And I'm sure Dukat would be like, oh, that was just the Obsidian Order, they were a bunch of fuckheads and they're all dead now, so don't worry about them. I'm the new face of Cardassia, and I say we want to be your allies. So I'm pretty sure... It does seem like a real turnaround still, but I can see an avenue to where that would make sense. It was clearly the writers like trying to take different directions, but And also, of course, the female changeling saying that to Garak was, a way to motivate him to try to wipe out the founders. And as much as I do like this scene, I think it was a really cool fight scene. I love it when Worf actually, is a good fighter and doesn't get his ass kicked. Really, Garak didn't stand a chance trying to attack Worf, and that was a cool. And I do like how after Worf beat him down, he's like, "You fight well for Taylor." Like that was cool. It was a good use of Worf. But as much as I like that scene, I have several issues with it. First of all, how would the changelings allow the Defiant to be capable of destroying, wiping out their homeworld? It seems like they should have taken more precautions. They should have had that Jim Hadar who was on the con, who put that little funky thingy on the console so that they couldn't record where they are. It seems like they should have also put a funky thingy on the weapons station to disable their weapons. It seems like that. Why didn't they do that? So the episode could happen, so they could have this cool scene. It doesn't actually make any sense. I know that Garak was trying to override, that's why I had to go in that weird little room. He was trying to override any weapons lockouts, but still, you think the Dominion would circumvent even something like that from happening. But. And the other issue I have with this is the fact that Garak gets off very lightly. Now, they try to excuse this by calling it out at the end of the episode, where Odo flat out says what the audience is thinking, because they said Garak is like, 6 months in the holding cell doesn't sound too appealing, and Odo responds to that is like, well, if you ask me, I think you got off lightly, saying exactly what the audience is thinking, and that doesn't make it better. If you point out a flaw, that doesn't actually make the flaw any better. It just points out that there is a flaw that this doesn't make any fucking sense. He tried to commit genocide and attack the Starfleet officer. He tried to sabotage the ship, and all he gets is 6 months? Come on. You know why they did this, though? Because Garak is a great character, and they don't want him off the show. And by the way, the next time we see Garak is the episode Things Past, which is kind of early in season 5, so it doesn't even seem like it's been 6 months. I mean, I guess you could say 3 months passed in between season 4 and 5, but still, it's he wasn't even gone. So it's not like I want them to put Garak in prison longer, because he's a great character. I don't want him off the show for the rest of the series. So, but don't have him do this. I don't know. It does. So those are the issues I have with it, even though I do like that scene. So getting into, I guess, the Galran thing. I read a thing, I think it was on Memory Alpha or somewhere, saying that the Ira Stephen Bear and the writers came up with this idea of Galran being a changeling has a way of wrapping up the whole Klingons being enemies storyline, which, hooray, please do that. Please get rid of this dumbass storyline, which, by the way, for the defenders of this storyline, the actual writers, the actual creatives of the show, the people who wrote the show, Ira Stephen Bear, Ronald D. Moore, Renee Echevarria, all them, Hans Bimler, they did not want to do the Klingons being enemy storyline. It's something that was forced on them by the studio, by Paramount, by Rick Berman, by the producers who are not creatives, who do not have a creative bone in their body. All they concerned about is, the Klingons are popular, so we want more ratings, so put the Klingons in this show. Money, 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 money. The actual creatives did not want to do this, and so they were looking for an excuse to undo it. which in season 5 I think was around the time. Because I know there was a time where the studio and the producers and Rick Berman kind of just gave up on Deep Space Nine. Like, not entirely because they didn't cancel it, but just gave up on trying to make it more popular. They were just like, fine, you do whatever the fuck you want to do. The ratings are decent enough to keep on the air, and you're obviously not going to get any better, so just do whatever the fuck you. And that's why the show got really good in the second half of season 5 and season 6. Because I think that midpoint in season 5 is when the studio gave up. And so that's when the writers, the actual creatives, were allowed to do what they wanted to do. But here's the thing I'll say. I was surprised to hear that they came up with the Garak Changeling storyline as a way to end the Klingons being enemies, because what it results in the next episode is Klingons going into a hot war with the Federation, which I think is a massive mistake, because it seems like whiplash to have them in a hot war where Klingons are actively like beheading Starfleet officers to 6 months later the Klingons being their best allies against Dominion. It seems like whiplash, but I guess that's more of a complaint for Apocalypse Rising, so I'll get more into this when I get into that episode. Also, I don't know, I didn't do enough research on this, so I can't say with certainty, but I get the impression that when they end this episode, they totally, fully intend to make Garak the Changeling. And I think is when they went to write the next episode is when they're like, actually, let's not make Garak the Changeling. Let's make Martok the Changeling. But again, I'll get to that more when I get to that episode. Because the whole thing, because in this episode, Odo's like, oh, I heard, there were images they were trying to hide from me. One was, Garak. But the next episode's trying to tell us that they were just misleading Odo and lying to him to try to make him think it was Garak, and that seems a bit far-fetched. That he's sensing sort of them hiding something, and they sense Garak. So the changelings are manipulating Odo. I don't know. I don't buy it. It reminds me of like the whole retcon of Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, where they said Kylo Ren told Rey that her parents were nobodies, and then Rise of Skywalker they said, oh, he was lying. He didn't actually. Your parents were nobodies. He lied to you. But the problem with that is that in The Last Jedi, he did not tell her that her parents were nobodies. She sensed it from him, which is not him telling her. Now you can say what she was sensing was him deceiving her, but that's far-fetched. But don't even get me started on the Rise of Skywalker. The whole thing was a disaster, but that's what this reminds me of. It seems far-fetched that the changelings were trying to hide something, but they were purposely deceiving him. And I'm pretty sure that they originally intended Garak to be the changeling. Pretty sure. And also the whole thing about, we started this to try to, end the Klingons being enemy storyline, but they didn't actually end it until halfway through season 5. And they had that other episode, Nor the Battle to the Strong, which had the Klingons being the bad guys and killing a bunch of Starfleet officers. What took you so fucking long? If the point was to end it, why didn't you end it immediately, if not quicker? And why'd you put them in a full-blown hot war? Yeah, well. I guess I'll mention the whole joke about Kira being pregnant and sneezing a lot, because they did mention that in the previous episode. And I do like how they're saying Bajorans react differently than humans, which makes sense, as they're an alien, when they're pregnant. But Yeah, and as I mentioned, I never saw the episode Body Parts. So when I watched this episode and Kira was sneezing, she was pregnant, I was like, come again? But then they mentioned in a line of dialogue that she, was carrying O'Brien's baby and being a surrogate. I'm like, okay, whatever. But, I do like Deep Space Nine having continuity. So. Anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters very much for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with my channel. I'd like to give a big special thanks to Jordan Johnson and Brandon Neal House. Thank you both so very, very much for your strong support. I'd also like to give a shout out to Tyler Cease, Benjamin Mead, Antarius Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Matty Jester, Alessandro Miguelosio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very much for your support. So, we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, Broken Link, more like, oh, this stinks. This one isn't booty crap. It's a good piece of the greater arc that is sort of ongoing throughout DS9's later seasons. Not the best, of course. It's not as good as Prophet and Lace or that baseball one that totally doesn't interrupt the flow of the story at all. I like how the changelings are developed a bit more here, and anything with Garak is pretty good. Oh, Season 4, we barely knew ye. Almost Vic Fontaine time. Now, Pally, that's something worth snapping your fingers for. I do like Oh, This Stinks. There's another one. It's very similar to Great This Sucks, and you know how much I love that one. So I don't think it's quite as good as Great This Sucks, but I do love it. Oh, This Stinks. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, I was going to mention this earlier, but there's this Pixies song called Broken Face, and every time I look at, for the past couple of months, and I saw Broken Link in the schedule, whenever I saw the title of the episode, I kept thinking of that Pixies song, but instead of saying Broken Face, I would sing it as Broken Link. I got a broken link. I got a broken link. Anyway, that's something entirely different. Oh, this stinks. I do like that. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, so we arrived at the end of Season 4. Fortunately, the episode is centered around Odo / the Dominion and the Founders and not the Klingons. Although, sadly, we get the scene with the Klingons' transmission that is not addressed again until the very end of the episode. The crisis is about a system, according to my memory, I never heard about, which doesn't increase my interest. If this were a normal episode, it would be quite good and decent, but as the last episode of the season, it was too unspectacular. I have feeling that the producers felt the same way, therefore included the scenes with the Klingons to create more tension. Again, O'Brien is the one to suffer. Odo is the one to announce a revelation at the end of the episode. At the end of a season, and we have, after Worf and Quark, another outcast, not very creative. Well, if this were a normal episode, I would probably give it a strong 7, but as the ultimate episode of a season, I will only give this a 5 out of 10. So 5, bringing it all the way down to a 5. Because it wasn't a worthy finale, I think is harsh, but that's just my humble opinion. But it is interesting. But as for Arcanus, it actually was mentioned. Ronald D. Moore talked about how he would try to slip in really minor TOS Easter eggs wherever he could, and I'm sure this was an example of that, because this was mentioned, and Arcanus was mentioned in several TOS episodes. Oh god, I'm trying to find... I know one of them was Arena. I believe Arcanus. I believe it was when the Enterprise was thrown away from the Gorn at the end of the episode by the Metron. Sulu had a line saying that it was, that they were near Arcanus. And Sisko does state explicitly in this episode that that Arcanus was a long way from Deep Space Nine. Oh, it's also mentioned in Day of the Dove. I don't know what the context. So it was mentioned in those two original series episodes. Not that I'm would expect you to know that. They're very I had to Google it to find it out myself, but just because I remember hearing somewhere that this was a TOS reference. But it was also mentioned in Discovery, because Discovery had this map and it was full of Easter eggs of all these planets and mentioned and other Star Trek things, and that's one of them. The Arcanus was on the map. And then it was also seen, I believe, on the map in Strange New Worlds, in Children of the Comet and Spock Amok. But it was shown as being Klingon affiliated. So I think what these modern Trek shows were implying was that it was taken by the Klingons in that Klingon War that took place during Discovery, but that some time after, during the peace, that it was ceded back to the Federation. Because if you notice in this episode, Gowron talks about how Arcanus is Klingon by right, but Sisko mentioned that it's been a Federation world for 100 years, and I believe Deep Space Nine takes place in the late 2370s, and Strange New Worlds Discovery was the late 2250s. So yeah, that timeline lines up a bit. That would have been about 100 years when it was ceded back to the Federation. But anyway, all these tiny little Easter eggs that only deep nerds like myself would know about, who has no life. But anyway, what else did you mention in your comments? O'Brien being the one to suffer. Yeah, of course, I noticed that, how the Jem'Hadar was the one who they'd attacked O'Brien. They always have to attack O'Brien. As I just watched this episode of Lower Decks, where they went to the Orion, and Mariner kept getting stabbed in the knife in the same shoulder. It happened like 3 times in a row, and I think that was making fun of like stuff like O'Brien, like the fact that he always gets attacked and hurt every single time. I thought there was something else I wanted to address, but I don't remember. Anyway, next comment is from Benjamin Mead, who says, "Poor Odo. He really has a tough time this episode. He's infected with not 1, but 2 killer diseases, and Dr. Bashir makes him lay on the infirmary bed without a blanket. Luckily, they finally give him a blanket on Defiant when his morphing effects needs to be covered up to spare the VFX department budget. It's not the best season ender by far, but I do like the notion of Odo volunteering to be judged for killing a changeling. I wish there was a little bit more effort to explain how the founders changed Odo into a solid. It seems more like magic as it is. But thank goodness the season ended before the writers ended up exiling all the main characters from their species. The Federation has really short prison sentences for things like aiding terrorists and attempting genocide, but I'm glad they didn't keep Garak off the show in a cell for very long. The other reference to that would be Cassidy Yates, who also only went to prison for like 6 months. Yeah, so yeah, that's funny about about them exiling all the main characters. They could have done Dax next. She could have been exiled from Trill. Like, she was at risk of being exiled from Trill, to be fair, in the episode Rejoined. So that if they actually followed through on that, then that would be the 4th character. Like, you could even say it's 3.5 because she was wanting to be exiled from Trill. Like, she was willing to be exiled from Trill Society. It was just the other one who wasn't. So yeah, actually it's more like 3.5. And I don't know if you could really exile the humans, though. I don't think that would really work. So I don't know. What could they... Well, you could say Eddington was exiled from his society because he joined the Maquis. He became an enemy. So there you go. It says 4.5. Well, that's stretching it, though. But, yeah, you could have had Kira be exiled from Bajor, but that wouldn't make any sense. She's so Bajoran. Or maybe Bajor could turn evil, and they could do the whole... authoritarian takeover with Kai Wynn, which they almost did in the episode Shakar, so they could have done that, and Kira could have been exiled from. But then they kind of did the whole Bajor thing on Circle, and so that would just be a repeat of that. So kind of understand that. But yeah, no, it's actually not 3. It's actually 4.5. Eddington, and then partly Jadzia almost got exiled from Trill. But yes, the blanket. So the whole Odo lying in bed thing. Like, why doesn't he just revert to his changeling form? Like, why is he lying in bed as a solid? Because that's not how he sleeps. That's not how he rests. And they're always like, oh, let's leave the room, give Odo some rest. If he really wants to rest, then he would resort to his liquid form. Like, not lie as a solid. Like, that didn't make any sense to me. Also, you start out the post by saying, poor Odo. And that does remind me, this is something that my ex-wife used to point out all the time. And she'd always make fun of this and go, poor Odo. Because that's what the female changeling says a lot. Is that she's always, and she even pointed out, she's always saying, poor Odo. Now, to be fair, like, I think she might have said it in the search. I don't think so. I think this episode might be the first time. Or maybe she said in the Heart of Stone. I don't remember. But I think this episode might be the first time. And it's just this episode. And then Behind the Lines, I believe she says that again. And maybe some other episodes in Season 6. But she says it twice in this episode. I did keep an eye on that because she said it when she first saw him on the Defiant, and then she said it again after they turned him into a human. So maybe she only says it like 3 or 4 times total in the entire show, but it seems like she says it a lot. She's like, poor Odo. Anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, really good episode, which let down by the inclusion of Garak trying to hook Odo up with what was deemed a sexy woman at the time. The joke about Bajoran women sneezing when pregnant is not funny. Does it make no difference if the baby is from another species for the carrier? I do like Kira giving Odo the day's criminal activity report. She knows that it is something that he will appreciate. People have asked why Odo tries to apprehend the Boslik freighter captain on his own. I think it is a matter of pride for him. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt but he never does that. Like, every other time he goes to apprehend someone, he always has other security officers. Like, we never seen him try to apprehend anyone else alone. At least I don't think. But anyway, sorry. I'll continue. Is it just me feeling uncomfortable about alien females with big tits? It just seems so unnecessary and sexist to me. Mark, do you think I am wrong? So let me answer that. No, I don't think you're wrong. It's not... I mean, I think it's something that has bothered me from time to time. But not in this particular episode. It didn't really. I don't know if you're referring to the Boslik freighter captain, because she's meant to be like all sexy, but she looks like a hairband, heavy metal hairband from the 80s. But whatever. Yeah, I don't know. It's not something that overly bothered me. It's because I find it typical of Hollywood. It's just one of those Hollywood cliches that you just get used to and expect to happen. Anyway, sorry, I'll continue. I have to applaud Odo's walk to the Defiant, but why are all these people watching him? I've learned to walk several times in my life, and the last thing I need is a crowd gawking at me. Kudos to Quark for showing he does care about Odo. Garak distracting Odo with tales of his career in the Obsidian Order is a good idea. Of course, O'Brien gets hurt by the Jem'Hadar when they board the Defiant with the female changeling because O'Brien must suffer. My sense of disbelief is challenged when the female changeling gives the Jem'Hadar pilot a device that will erase the route to the Founder's new home world. What Garak asks is if any Cardassians survived the battle of the Armarian Nebula. I get the impression that the female changeling is really angry. And finally, Worf gets to defeat someone in a fight and learns what we already know: never trust Garak. When Odo is returned from the Great Link as a human, I really wasn't very surprised. Humans are the people he is closest to after all. The reveal of Gowron as a changeling seemed contrived to me. Seven Adosian orchids out of 10. I actually think Odo should have been turned into Bajoran, because after all, he was raised by Bajorans, found by Bajorans. He's in the Bajoran uniform, a Bajoran officer. He's good friends. He's in love with Kira, who is a Bajoran. So I actually think it would have made more sense for them to turn him into a Bajoran, but I guess they wanted to make him more relatable to the audience, I suppose. But that's just me. And yeah, well, you get the impression that the female changeling's angry at Garak because that's how the actress plays it. She plays it like she's fucking pissed. Like, fuck you, you guys tried to wipe out the changelings, so yeah, you're all fucking doomed. Go fuck yourselves. Which, again, is weird that she turned from that to, oh, Cardassians are our allies now. But I guess it shows how the Dominion are political beings and that they'll take any advantage they could get. So when Dukat came to him, it was like, look, you can come live with us and set up a foothold in the Alpha Quadrant. They're not going to turn that down. Let's see. Where else are we? Oh yeah, the Jem'Hadar has the device to put on the helm. Because here's the thing. When they beam on the Defiant, the changeling's like, okay, we're taking Odo with us. You guys can go home now. And Cisco's like, no, I insist we go with you. And the changeling's like, okay, very well. So that gives the impression that they weren't expecting the Defiant to go with them. So why is it that Jem'Hadar happens to have that device that can wipe the logs of the navigation? Does he just carry that around him all the time? Like what? I know you could probably argue that the Changeling knew it was a possibility that Cisco would want to come with them, so they brought that just in case, but still, I don't know. It just has that funky thing that goes around. I also heard someone else like suggest that the Jem'Hadar are not acting as reverent to the founders, that they're being a bit sort of speaking freely, like they do, like, pull weapons on Starfleet when they argue or say anything to the Changeling, to be fair, so they're definitely being protective of her. But it seems like, as established in the previous episode, that they see the Changelings as gods, so that they should be more, like, silent and more sort of reverent around them. Which I do see that. I do see that being the case. Oh yes, you also mentioned the sexy woman that Garak tries to set Odo up with, and I was going to complain that we'd never see her again, and it seems like they were setting her up and then she just disappears. But I read that actually that was the intention when they wrote this episode, was to have her be a recurring love interest for Odo in season 5, but after they saw this episode and they watched this episode, they're like, no, that character doesn't work. So it was a conscious decision to change their mind and not bring her back, which I definitely can see. I am a bit disappointed because they set someone up and then don't follow through, but on the other hand, it doesn't seem like a very good match for Odo. She just seems like she's just who's a flirty, I don't know, not Odo's type, I guess would be the best way to saying it. So when they eventually did give him a love interest, it was a one-off, which it would have been more interesting. It was a recurring, like they were planning for, but. And of course, I'm talking about the episode Simple Investigation, season 5, and this was after he turned into a changeling. The whole point was to give him a love interest while he was a human. They kind of fucked that one off, but they did eventually give him a love interest, and she was more fitting for Odo, having to do with the criminal underworld, and that seems Odo's thing, and so yeah, that seemed, and also the way she was very smart and it seemed more like Odo's type than this person did. So I can see where they're coming from, but at the same time, I kind of wish they followed up on this. Anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for Broken Link out of 10 is Broken Link. Sorry. My rating for Broken Link, go look up the Pixie songs if you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But anyway, my rating for Broken Link out of 10 is a 7. Very good. I was thinking of giving this an 8. Because I do like the Odo saying something shocking ending. I was like, that is an exciting ending. Like, Gowron's a changeling. It's a huge revelation. And I like the idea of Odo being exiled from his people. Like I said, I like that Odo faces consequences for his prior actions. However, those consequences kind of disappear after this episode, but whatever. In season 6, where they're like, oh, we've forgiven you. Like, but as much as I do like this stuff, like this episode is not that exciting. It's Odo lying in bed being grumpy for most of it. And you get some interesting interactions with the Jem'Hadar, but it's not anything special. Like To the Death was much better in that department. So yeah, it's fine. Like, I just don't think, it's not enough to get an 8, not quite. And I think also, like Antares, I'm probably also grading this on a curve because it's the finale and it's not a particularly good finale, so maybe that's also why I didn't give it an 8. So yeah, but 7 is still respectable rating. It's not like I gave it a negative rating or anything, but yeah, it's fine. So 7 out of 10 for me. So that is it for my review of Broken Link. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, please. No, please leave a like, subscribe, and if you really would like to support the channel, you could support me on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description below. You get different rewards for different tiers, such as pre-releases, a series of Patreon only videos that I do where I revisit my review for reviews I've already done of Star Trek episodes, and you can make long comments that I'll read in my videos and stuff like that. You can check out if you're so inclined to do so. Also, if you are not a Patreon supporter, you can still leave comments, but shorter, but you can leave some comments that I'll read in my videos if you go to my Blue Sky or Facebook page. Links to both of those are in the description. Alright, so let's see what's coming up next on on the old channel here. So I shall be wrapping up. I had now finished season 4 of DS9 and also finished season 2 of Voyager, so I shall be doing my wrap up for both of those things. So on Thursday I'll be ranking all the episodes of season 4 of Star Trek DS9, and on Saturday I'll be ranking all the episodes of season 2 of Voyager. And then I have a few videos to do in between seasons. I like to break up the seasons a little bit. So next Monday I'll start with the first of those with a video about shows that have a lot of Star Trek actors in them, where I'll be looking, just not even making commentary, just pointing out actors who've been in both Star Trek and other shows, such as I'll be looking at shows that I watch. Not necessarily all the shows that have a lot of Star Trek actors in them, just the ones that I've noticed and I've seen, such as like Babylon 5, Stargate. The big one is Seinfeld. I think there's like huge amount of actors who've been in both Star Trek and Seinfeld. And there's, maybe I might mention other shows like 24 and Lost, something like that. But anyway, yeah, be sure to check all that out, and be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.